Why isn't Kepler? Why Kepler, huh? Well, first I'm going to say three things, three caveats. First, I'm a stutterer, so I'm going to have gaps in my speech. Life is difficult for some of us, so I'm sorry about that. Second, I think radical embodied cognitive science, which is not an N, it's an S, is not radical enough. So probably I'm going to say things that seem stupid for most of you. Take it easy, and that's all. And third, this is the first time I'm giving this talk, so any feedback is good. I don't know if the template is a good one. I don't know if it is going to fit in 30 minutes, so any feedback is going to be good. What I'm going to do here is first I'm going to explain why I'm interested in Kepler and embodied or embodiment or whatever. Then I'm going to explain the reasons why Kepler is or isn't the father of embodied cognition. Then I'm going to relate that with what I take is the significance of embodiment, and it has to do with Gestalt and with Phenomenology. And at the end, I'm going to claim that all this thing about Kepler and embodiment is important because it has some consequences for contemporary cognitive science. Like for some critics of the embodied approach, I'm going to explain why Andy Clark is Jerry Fowler 2.0 and why wreckers don't get ecological psychology. So let's start. But why am I asking that? I have two quotes here. One says, natural vision depends on the eyes, in the head, on a body supported by the ground. The other one says, the eyes are attached to the head, so through the head they are attached to the body, through the body, to the ship or the house, or to the entire region and its perceptible horizon. You probably know one of these quotes. You might not know the other one. The first quote is by J.J. Gibson in the ecological approach to visual perception, but the second quote is by Kepler in the 17th century, which is surprising because they are two pretty similar ones. It seems they both want to include the body, the environment, when they talk about the eyes or the perception. So if they are similar, why? I mean, if they are similar, why we think that Gibson is the pioneer of embodiment, or one of the first ones in trying to develop a scientific approach that is related with embodiment, and Kepler doesn't seem to be the father of the embodied approach, no? So why isn't Kepler the father of embodied cognition? Or maybe he is. No, he is not. And I'm going to explain why, or I'm going to try to give the reasons why I think Kepler is not the father of the embodied approach. I think, though, that Kepler is an important figure in embodiment. Vivian, Tony, and myself have a paper on that, and we define embodiment as an explanatory strategy that consists in ceasing to appeal to internal intrinsic features of things to explain why they behave how they behave, and we move to an explanation that depends on laws of interaction. For example, a falling stone or a falling thing in Aristotelian terms was explained, the behavior of the falling was was explained by the appeal to the substantial form of the stone, which is kind of an intrinsic teleological feature of the stone. After the scientific revolution, the explanation of the falling of a stone appeals to a law of interaction, the law of universal gravitation. So this change in the explanatory strategy from Aristotelianism, or the appeal to the intrinsic features of things, to an explanation based on laws of interaction, is what we call embodiment. And we think this is the same move. I mean, this move is done in the scientific revolution by Kepler, by Descartes, Newton. Descartes is actually explicit on that. He claims that substantial forms are little minds attached to the bodies. And he thought that this was not possible. It was not a possibility, so he fought against this kind of Aristotelian explanation. But we claim that Gibson himself made that move with ecological psychology. So in the classic computational approach, what you explain is the mechanism, the feature in the agent that accounts for the behavior. In ecological psychology, we are supposed to explain the laws of interaction, the laws that rule the behavior and the relation between behavior and ecological information. So the same move you can find in the scientific revolution in physics, optics, etc., is the move Gibson tries to do in cognitive science. But to do that, he needs to redescribe some features of the agent and the environment. He needs to change information as such for ecological information that is a specific kind of information. And the mechanism here is resonance. We were talking yesterday about it. I will say something about it too. But the point is that why, if Kepler made this move of embodiment in physics, and he claims that the eyes are in a head, in a body, in an environment, he is not the father of the embodied approach to cognitive science. Well, because although he talks about bodies, environments, he still thinks that vision is explained by the appeal to visual spirits. He says, how the retinal image or picture is joined together with the visual spirits that reside in the retina, in the nerve, blah, 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 I leave to the natural philosophers to argue about. So although he talks about the body and the environment, the explanation is still internal. It's about how the pictures are joined with the visual spirits in our mind. So that's why, although he talks about the body, he offers a disembodied explanation to put it in the picture. The visual spirits are here, and that's what you have to explain for the perception. But why do Kepler talk then about the eyes and the head, etc.? To Kepler, the body was just another instrument. He was in the business of trying to justify the use of telescopes and other instruments in science. There's a great book, Baroque Science, by Gall and Chen and Morris about this topic. It's a great book. But the point is that imagine what was to look through a telescope in the 17th century. The devil inside. You know, the lenses were bad, you see there big things. I mean, so that's why Kepler was in the business to justify their use. And the way to justify them was say, hey, okay, they are instruments, as our body is an instrument too. So the retina is a screen, as you use on a screen. So that's why he tried to include the body in the explanation, although the meat, the magic, is still in the mind. I'm going to call this way to understand the body as an instrument for the way we see things, the way we hear things. I'm going to call this the instrumental use of the body. This is important because, yes, you will see. Well, so that's why I think that the explanatory strategy of embodiment is not enough for an embodied cognitive science. I mean, you can, even if you use the body and the environment in your narrative about how we see, how we hear, but they are considered just as a mere instruments, your explanation is still disembodied. That's why Kepler is not the father of embodiment. But this opens a new question. So if the embodied strategy is not enough to have an embodied cognitive science, what is the significance of embodied in embodied cognitive science? And I'm going to go there now. I take Gibson is the father of any embodied approach. And against Tony, I don't know if I say this here, but I think he's the father of the scientific embodied approach, although there's no good science in his books. So, because he includes the body and the environment and the lawful relation between them as a part of the explanation. I want to say that although in different fashion, some other embodied approaches like the sensory motor approach and some forms of enactivism agree with this idea of that we have to account for the relation between body and between organisms and their environment to fully explain a psychological event. But to do this move, which is, let me go fast, which is this move, as I've said, he has to redescribe agent and environment, and they have to add two conditions sine qua non to have an embodied approach to cognitive science. And these two conditions are that environmental information has some structure, and this is the relevant thing about the environment, and that the body is active, that we are always engaged in some kind of action and movement. I mean, I think that the meaning of embodiment is not only this explanatory strategy, but also has to include these two correlates to work as an embodied explanation. I know this is a strong claim. We'll see if I can make sense of it. So I think there are at least three interesting features regarding these two conditions. First, why I claim they are sine qua non. Why are they part of the significance of embodiment, and what is the intellectual inheritance of these two ideas. I think they are sine qua non because this is the only way we have, until now at least, to make body and environment to play an essential role in the psychological explanation. So a role as important as the brain. The point is that only by the acknowledgement that there's some structure in the environmental information and that the body is active, body and environment can play a role that is not instrumental in the explanation, that is essential. For example, by the movement of the body, we can include dynamics easily in the explanation. We can think about time in terms of the psychological explanation in a different way, not just as a snapshot, but as an event and that stuff. So I think they are sine qua non because if you want a truly embodied approach, you need this role of the body and the environment in your explanation, and they are part of the significance of embodiment, because embodiment is not only to talk about the body and environment, but to talk about the body and environment in this specific way. I want to talk a little bit about the intellectual inheritance of these two features. The first one is the structure of environmental information. We have been talking about this during 2 days now, so I don't have to explain too much. But for example, the structure of light is what specifies the layout of the environment. I say that this is also important for some non-Gibsonians too, because again, in the sensory motor approach also, the contingencies are some kind of structure too that is important for the explanation and that kind of stuff. And I think that this fact is essential for the lawful relation between bodies and the environment, because in order to have a lawful relation between your behavior and the information has to be specific of the layout of the environment. So when you change your place, when you move, when you act through it, you can have new information and you can deal with it in that way. And I think that this idea of structure is, I'm not sure yet if it is a radicalization or a reformulation of the reaction of the bundle and the constancy hypothesis, because I take these two hypotheses are departing from sensations to explain our experience of the world. And what Gibson does is trying to depart from sensation to explain perception. So it's the same movement. So environmental information does not depend on sensation. We can see this here that we don't have actually a triangle here or a sphere here, but we see it. And for Gibson, it is the same. I mean, the ecological information that does not depend on sensations. And the other thing is that the same stimulation can have different significance depending on the context and on the actions you are. You have seen this, that we see more dark these parts when it is a good picture, blah, blah. But the same thing, that you can have some information in your experience that does not depend on pure sensation. So that's why I think that the structure of ecological information, I would claim that ecological information is a structure, but that's another thing. It's a radicalization of, or a reformulation of these principles. And the other important feature of embodiment is that the body is active. I mean, it's through action is how we generate information. We only have optic flow if we move. It's the way. So as far as through action is the only way we generate information, and information is essential to guide our action. The only way to have a lawful relation in which the body and the environment play an essential role in the psychological explanation is to have these two sides, and one of them is the action. The famous picture, we all have seen that picture. And I think that action is the part of the phenomenological inheritance you can find in ecological psychology. I think it comes from the notion of practicing being and time, which is kind of a reaction to the Kantian idea that our openness to the world is through the concepts or through the mental concepts, yeah. And our primary relation with the world is through practice, through action. Is this readiness to hand? Is the use? Is when we act? Is when we start discovering our world. And I think Maurice Merleau-Ponty brings this to the body, because for Heidegger, yes, the Dasein has this relation, but the Dasein is still, I mean, it's the human being, but it's still an abstraction. But Merleau-Ponty put it in the earth and say, yeah, through actions with our bodies that allows us to do some actions and not some other ones is how we engage with the environment. And I think this idea of action is essential, because ecological information only appears in the relation between the world and the organism. And that's why you need action to have a fully embodied approach. Well, if you think about it, until now, I've talked about Kepler, which is cool, but it's just a guide, and about some kind of obvious things about ecological psychology. I haven't made any weird statement on ecological information or the role of action. It's kind of, we know. But why I think this is important? We go there. Because the point is that when we use the body as an instrument, but we explain vision in a different terms, we are diminishing the role of the body and the environment in the explanation. So when we don't understand that the way to include body and environment in an embodied explanation is through understanding the structure of information and the action, we might have some embodied approaches or some people that think that they are doing embodied cognitive science, and they are not, because they are still using the body as an instrument. And I'm going to talk about 3 things about it. Some critics, Andy Clark, and the wreckers. So we probably, most of us know Fred Adams and Ken Aizawa. They have spent the last 20 years trying to say that embodiment is stupid and we shouldn't do that. And yeah. And there's another paper last year by Goldinger et al. It's called The Poverty of Embodied, or The Poverty of the Embodied Approach to Cognitive Science, which is on the same lines. So Adams and Aizawa, which I misspelled there, is Aizawa, there's neither, okay, claims that the embodied on embodied cognitive science is an overstatement. And Goldinger et al. Say that it is meaningless. I would like to talk about these 2 things because I think they both are stuck in the embodied approach that takes the body as an instrument. And I think this quote is very interesting. They say microscopes, telescopes, mass spectrometers, and some other things, blah, blah. In all these cases, I mean, when we use these things, common sense has it that our cognitive faculties restricted to the, I don't know why I have this there. I don't know what it is. To the what? To the confines of our brains, can be aided in any matter of ways by cleverly designed non-cognitive tools. So if you think about it, they are trying to criticize the embodied approach by saying, hey, look, but the instrumental use is cool. Okay? So they think that this instrumental use of the body or the telescopes is disembodied, is not good at all. So, and I agree with them here. I think that the embodied approaches based on the instrumental use of the body are not embodied approaches at all. Or they take embodiment and they make an overstatement regarding the role of the body and the environment in their explanations. So that's what I just say, that the previous quote is interesting because they embrace the instrumental use of the body. And of course, if you take the body as an instrument, the word embodied in embodied cognitive science is an overstatement. I agree with that. And that's all that I have to say about Adams and Aizawa. I think I agree with them, but I think their target is not what they think they are. And this same thing happens here. Goldinger et al. Say, embodied cognition is a multifaceted theoretical stance that says, first, that cognitive processes are influenced by the body. Influence might mean anything, but it seems to mean that influence, like glasses or like a telescope. Cognition exists in the service of action, and it is situated in the environment, which is also a big statement. But it's meaningless, yes. I mean, it's situated there, but that what, I mean, for an embodied approach to be situated means that there's a structure in the information. here to be situated can mean anything. So I think that, and after saying this, after these definitions of what is embodiment, they claim that the embodied cognition is scientifically and experimentally meaningless. And yes, I agree with them, again. But because the target, again, is not embodiment. It's some forms of, or some approaches that they claim themselves as embodied approaches, but they are not. And one example of these approaches, I want to look to the camera and say, is Andy Clark. sorry. Okay, sorry. Kaufer and Tonis make a distinction in his book between embodied cognitive science, which is wide computationalism, predictive coding, etc., and radical embodied cognitive science. I want to reframe these two things and say that the embodied cognitive science is Keplerian cognitive science, disembodied. They use the body as an instrument, while radical embodied cognitive science is Gibsonian, and we all love them. The point is that the difference between them is that the former holds an instrumental use of the body. I mean, for Jerry Fodor, Andy Clark, Rummel Hart, the Charlans, I don't care. What is important, the magic happens within the head. The mechanism is there. You have a body that constrains what you can do in your environment, but in terms of explanation, is the mechanism. This can be a language-like one, a network, a Bayesian system, but the magic happens here. I like a thing that it seems like for all of them, there's some magical thing in the retina. From the retina to the outside, you explain everything with physics, optics, light, blah. From the retina to the inside, the magic happens, and you need a computer or a Bayesian system. So we don't really know what is that magic here, but it seems to be there. So the point is that no matter if Andy Clark, I mean, not only Andy Clark, but I take him like an example, of course. I don't hate him that much. Andy Clark talks about, this is distributed, embodied, frugal, blah, 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 but the important thing is the Bayesian system, bottom up, top down here. The meat happens there, the magic is there. So it's still disembodied. Why? Because he talks about the agent, environment, but the explanation is still there. It's still inside, in this intrinsic property of the body. He doesn't take the explanatory strategy, so he doesn't really need to talk about environmental information or any other thing, because all the work is happening here. Of course, different bodies, or if your body is different to my body, this will influence what we can do, as if we use two different microscopes. It will influence what we can see, but what we see is still explained by this mental mechanism. By the way, yesterday we were talking about resonance. I think that if we try to postulate any information processing mechanism to explain resonance, we are violating the main tenets of ecological psychology. So we cannot use a Bayesian system to try to explain how we pick up information. But I try to say something about it, and I have a paper. It's called A Theory of resonance. It's in Minds and Machines, 2017, and I'm trying to offer a non-information processing mechanism for resonance. The ad finished here, and I keep going. So Andy Clark, the problem is that he takes the body as an instrument. So although he thinks he's doing embodied cognitive science, he's not, in my opinion. And the last thing is that if you misunderstand the role of the structure and the role of the active body in ecological psychology, you are probably going to misunderstand ecological psychology. And this happens to Hato and Min, because they claim that it seems some Gibsonian theories have been driven to a position which appears to propose externalities, world-involving instead of brain-involving versions of cognitivist poses. They claim that it seems like as far as we talk about information and meaning and that stuff, it seems like there's some content outside that has to go inside. And if this happens, as in any other approach, they criticize ecological psychology suffers for the hard problem of content. That there's no way to explain that there is some content outside and we that can come inside and that stuff. But the point is that they think this because they think ecological information is meaningful in some kind of semantic sense. But that's not how it is meaningful. It is meaningful because ecological information is some kind of a structure in the environment. And this structure is meaningful not because it carries any content. It is meaningful insofar it lawfully constrains behavior and is lawfully constrained by behavior. So the meaning here doesn't have to do with any content or any semantic property, but with some kind of lawful co-determination. And it is so because in the significance of the embodiment, there's a structure and there's an active body. Wrapping up and I'm finishing, Kepler is not the embodied cognitive science. Embodiment, as I have said, is an explanatory strategy, and it is in the very constitution of modern science and also in ecological psychology too. Such an explanatory strategy requires a very specific understanding of the body, environment, and their role in the psychological explanation. So you don't have to appeal to them, you have to appeal to them in a very specific way, taking into account the structure of information and that the body is an active thing. And the misunderstanding of these two main features of embodiment leads to some troubles to some contemporary cognitive scientists. Thank you.